right, welcome everybody to the Unraveler Show. I'm so excited to launch tonight with my friend William Vincent. This is going to be an epic series. I can't even tell you how excited I am. I'm going to warn you up front that we are both technically inept. And we're going to be figuring this out as we go along. So I'm hoping you were able to even see that video. I'm hoping that your questions will come through. I'm going to be trying to track the live chat as we go through the show, and when it's question time, I'm going to take a look at that, and you'll see my head pop down, and hopefully I'm doing everything right. We're going to see how this goes, but if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But we'll figure it out as the weeks go on. But be prepared to throw your questions down more near the end of the show. We're going to go for about an hour of just talking, and then we'll open it up for Q&A around the 1 hour mark. But William is here. I'm so excited. Dude, bro, okay, so if anybody ever followed us online with our interactions, you would swear we hated each other. I think I hated you. You may have hated me. And then we had a chat on the phone, and it was like I felt like stepbrothers, you know. Do we just become best friends? You know, let's go play karate in the garage, you know, like it was an amazing moment. So
Yeah.
I knew this was going to be a match made in heaven. This show is going to be so much fun. You're very, very easy to talk to, very friendly, very open-minded. I hope that I come across the same way, and I think that's going to allow for an incredible chat. So, Vincent, before I talk a little bit about my past and why I'm here and why we're having this conversation, I want our guests to hear your story. Tell us a little bit about what you believe, where you're from, why you're here, why we're having this conversation, whatever you want to say, man. Let your audience get to know you.
Yeah, and first of all, thank you, Alan, for giving me the opportunity to do this and reaching out. And yeah, it was really cool to have that conversation. I really enjoyed it. It was really fun. I think as we work through these topics together, one of the things I really liked the most about it was that we were really thinking and listening and not trying to shoot each other down and or win this bully debate, but really listening and talking about things. And that was really something I really love to do. My background, I'm trying to condense a really long story to something really short, but I was raised in a fairly fundamental Christian family. I have ministers and pastors on both sides of my family. I was involved in Christian ministry pretty early. I was an associate pastor of a church at the age of 17. By the time I was in my mid 20s, I was actually pastoring another church in about the year 1992. I think it was between 92 and 95. I encountered full preterism, and I think what that caused me to do, and I don't want to run down that rabbit trail maybe too quickly, but what it caused me to do is to start questioning. It made me question a lot of things, and it was like I pulled a thread and I started unraveling things. So it wasn't an instantaneous process, but over a long period of time, well, the first thing I tried to do was really work really hard to defend sort of a fundamentalist view of Christianity. Studied, read, memorized arguments, but something about it really just didn't. Cognitive dissonance. It never made sense exactly, and I really came to a point where I got tired of defending things that I didn't think were true. So I kind of went through this process of, if, and you've probably heard this before, if you had been born in India or born in the Middle East or born in, I don't know, South America, then your culture and religion may have been different. Your worldview would have certainly been different. So I said to myself, well, if I'm going to really take a look at what I should believe about everything, I should start with what I consider maybe to be the zero sum, and that to me was atheism. And and I didn't want to be a kind of person who was always afraid of it, always running from it, always trying to say, well, trying to excuse it. I wanted to face this idea, this topic head on. And so I did spend probably, I would say, close to 10 years. I spent interviewing, talking, um, trying to have conversations, intelligent conversations, and so the book that I wrote, and I've thought a lot about it because we've talked about it, and I think maybe your perspective of it when you read it the first time maybe might be a bit different than what you might read it now because of talking to me and knowing my experience and where I'm coming from. The book is not intended to prove that atheism is incorrect, and it's not intended to prove that Christianity is correct. It's just intended to show that these sorts of arguments are not good arguments. And if a person reads this book and says, I'm still an atheist, but the arguments that you are presenting and contending with I agree with you, they're not good arguments, then I feel like I'm successful. Um, the other part of this is I'm also hopefully challenging to some degree. I don't really want to say that I'm trying to fight fundamentalism in this book, but I really hope that my approach is different than the fundamentalist approach. I'm not approaching this that if atheism isn't true, then Christianity has to be true. My approach is let's really think clearly about what is true, and let's not use bad arguments to build our way toward the truth. So, and I guess I'll say that, and I'll say this a little bit, and I'll let you respond. But I really don't like cheap arguments. I don't like low hanging fruit kind of easy stuff. I want to think about this, and at the end of the day, if we walk away from the discussion and you still believe what you believe and I believe what I believe, but we understand each other a bit better and we're respectful and we're actually speaking clearly, that's good enough for me. So the book, and I'll say, I said I would say that shut up, and then I lied, and I won't shut up, and I'll say something else. But the book is going to be antagonistic. If you've not read it, you're going to think I'm being antagonistic, and I am, because I want to challenge the argument. Read it, and if you don't agree, if it's not your argument, good, you're not making a bad argument. But those arguments are bad arguments, and they're arguments that I saw repeated over and over and over again in these discussions.
Very good, very good. And I'm excited because one of the things we're going to do with each other throughout this process, hopefully, is challenge those arguments that don't hold water and walk away from this a little bit stronger in our thought processes. And I agree with you. Whether we agree or don't agree at the end, I just want to learn and I want to grow and I want to be a better person and I want to have better reasoning skills than when we started this conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
So,
absolutely. Yes.
so I think that's great, and I think that's why we were able to have such a great dialogue, and I'm super excited about this because of that. We're going to definitely be able to present something that a lot of our listeners are not accustomed to. Now, a little bit about me, just real quick. I was a Christian, not of the same brand as William. William, if I'm addressing your view correctly, you are an Orthodox Christian, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Which, as I've been learning more than I ever really understood in the past, it is somewhat significantly different than the sola fide type Christian that
Yes.
that I was. The sola, the grace alone, faith alone, Christ alone, the sola scriptura alone,
Right.
those solas, that was my brand of Christianity. 100%, that is the only way you can be saved. And so that's what I come out of. And I venture to guess the majority of our listeners come out of my background. I would guess. I might be wrong, but I venture to guess they do. So you're going to be presenting a side to this that many of our listeners have not heard of, which I think is wonderful because you may be presenting something that someone like me, having escaped something like that, hasn't considered, right?
Sure.
So that's kind of cool. And vice versa. You're going to be considering something that you haven't necessarily encountered, which would also present some challenges to your line of thinking. So I think that's really cool. Uh, so I came out of a Christian background, staunch Christian background. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because I write about it in my book. You can follow my story, but definitely come out of a very strong background of Christianity. I was a pastor poured my life into it. And eventually, through a series of circumstances, ended up closing down my church and everything. But long story short, I ended up no longer believing in God. I lost my faith. It just disappeared one day. Didn't know why really. It just happened. Never really took the time to think about it. It was just one day I was a Christian and one day I wasn't. Um, and this is after 40 years of growing up in Christianity. I always was a Christian. I never knew anything different. It wasn't like I was faking it. It wasn't like I was just trying to make money because let's face it, and it's not like I ever got rich off the gospel. I mean, I wasn't Joel Osteen. There was nothing. I mean, I like you, I ventured in the full preterism. So that's one commonality that you
Sure.
and I have. And full preterism, for those who may not know, who may be watching, is a view that all things were fulfilled in the past, and particularly in the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so all prophecies were done then and there, and that's the end of it. And then, there's a lot of debate as to whether there's implications after and or not or whatever. And we're not going to get into that right this minute in my testimony part, but that's where we were. I kept going and I left Christianity altogether. You stopped and you said, wait a second, you took a step the opposite direction. Very fascinating.
Mhm.
Um, but that's where I ended up, a complete atheist. And then I had an interview with Jen Fishburne, and she asked me what was the reason that got me out of Christianity, and that's what sent me on the plunge, thinking, why did this happen? And that's where my book, How to Kill God the Easy Way, came out. So we both had similar experiences as to why we wrote our books. Um, you just ended up writing it, taking a step back. I ended up writing it, taking a step forward. It sounds rude saying it that way because it almost sounds like I'm using yours derogatorily, but you know what I mean when I say that. I don't mean that you went backwards, you idiot. That's not what I mean.
No, I get it. No worries. You're good. You're
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. Although I do think you're brainwashed, but we'll talk about that because that's my thing. Um,
Clean brains are good, by the way.
what's that?
I said clean brains are good, by the way.
Yes, they are. So here we are. We are brought together in this moments. I feel like it's almost like a holy matrimony, like here we are. And so we're gonna start right out the gate by talking about your chapter one in your book, maybe even the introduction, um, because we're just gonna hit it hard.
Yeah,
Anybody that's here listening to us, they know already that we just shoot from the hip. We're not here to stroke egos. We're just gonna talk. If you're here, you already know that. So my guess is, if you're already offended by something, you're gone anyway. So we're gonna be just fine. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. William, you start out your book with an introduction, which I actually when I read the introduction, I was like, this is going to be an interesting book because you didn't start out saying atheists suck, atheists are evil, atheists, you know what I mean? Like that's not the way you approached it.
right.
Quite the contrary. You made the case that this doesn't mean atheists are missing something. This doesn't mean they're wrong. This doesn't mean anything. It just means I'm going to challenge some of the thoughts that I've heard atheists say.
Sure.
Here we go. I thought that was a great introduction and I thought it was positive. So that sets off the tone in a much more positive way than I would have anticipated. Any other thoughts you want to say about your introduction? I want you to say, and then, if you don't mind, can you give a summary of chapter one and what your goal is in that chapter? What are you trying to accomplish? And then we'll just dialogue about it.
Sure. And I'm glad that I really am glad that you felt the introduction was fair and at least trying to be fair. I may not be right, but I hope I was trying to be fair. And essentially, I would not argue that atheism, that if a person becomes an atheist, that they're going to start eating babies and weird stuff like that, or that there are not atheists that are not better ethically and morally than some devout Christians. That's not an argument either. I think if I were writing another book about Christian arguments that are stupid, that would be one of them. Is that if you become an atheist, then you're just going to uh, be the worst person ever. And I don't think that's true. That's not the point. The point is, if you're going to believe something and make assertions, then I believe that your rationale should be it should be logical and rational. It shouldn't contradict itself, etc. So that's kind of hopefully what I was trying to say in the introduction. And it kind of leads into that first chapter. And I'll tell you, Alan, that first chapter really is a bigger topic. And I kind of brush over it in, in my style there, but it's a bigger topic than what I probably could do justice to in one small chapter. Because if you study world religions, the ability to, and I'm kind of segueing into that. And I guess maybe I should. The first chapter is it challenges the idea that atheism is not a religion. Now, if you're an atheist and you're listening to that, you probably got pissed off. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to piss you off, but maybe I was a little bit. But in seriousness, if you look at the study of world religions, it's difficult for people who study religion anthropologically to say exactly what a religion is. And if we distill it down to some very basic, and not talking about Christianity, Islam. I'm talking about we have things like Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism. When we're studying the whole thing about human religions, and you come to some basic definitions, then I think that some ways atheism does fall within that definition. And like I said, I know people may not like that statement. And it was, I think the basics of it, and I don't have that right in front of me. I'm sorry, but I believe the two basic points was holding to a system of values or beliefs and doing that with ardor or fervor. In other words, these are principles I hold to as true, and I believe that I should propagate them, I should defend them, I should stand for them. And if that's the basic definition of religion, then some forms, if not most forms of atheism, would fall into that category. Um, and and I guess what am I trying to argue there? I'm trying to argue that if we're going to say, well, you believe this religion, you believe it, and you're stupid for believing things you can't prove, I don't think that's a fair place to start that conversation. And I'll pause there and let you respond to that, and then you can tell me if I did a good job introducing that or if that I rambled around a bit.
No, no, you're fine. No, you did a good job. And I want to emphasize you not only made the case or attempted to make the case that it was a religion, but that it was a belief system,
Belief system, yes.
right? Which I think, if I'm understanding you, you're using that synonymously with a religion.
Yes.
Okay. So yes, no, that's a good introduction to what you explained in that chapter. Um, and then at several points you make the case that atheists rebut against that, and they say, no, we just don't believe that God exists. We have a lack of belief or failure to believe, or however it's stated.
Right, right, exactly. Yes.
So you're saying that in some way that is also a belief,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. You hear people often say, well, you can't prove a negative, and that's not true. You can absolutely prove a negative. Who did that didn't understand the rules of logic. If something is true, then the antithesis of that is also, or I'm trying to think of a good example. It's kind of escaping me right now, but you can take if you can say something is not true, then it means that you are making an affirmative about the negative. It's still a statement of affirmation. And so I think that if atheists say, I don't believe in God, and here's the thing, Alan, you can tell me, and you're probably that one atheist that I was wanting to look for to have a real good conversation with, because I could never get these kind of questions answered. What's the problem as an atheist to just say, I look at all the facts, and at the end of the day, my belief is that there's no God? Why is that a problem? I don't, you can let me know what you think about it.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I would categorize it as a problem if it were an actual reality. So my issue with it is not that I have a problem with saying atheism has a belief system. My problem is that I don't actually think it does. So I disagree with your premise entirely. Um, but if we actually ended up having a belief system, I'd say, okay, and there's no problem there, I guess, except that at the end of the day, if we actually did have a belief system and we were a religion and we were saying we were anti-religion, then we would be self-defeating. So yeah,
Right, exactly.
I guess I would have a problem with that. But again, I don't agree with the premise. And here's why. I think the problem really comes down to a convolution of two levels of what people like to call faith. And I write about this in my book, um, and and it's an important distinction because I think this is where the confusion comes in. So there is the first layer of, and I'll use faith just for the sake of argument this moment, but I think there's a better term for it. Like confidence is a better term than faith for this first layer, but that's fine. We can call it faith. Faith in the second layer, or confidence in the second layer. And that second layer is your system by which you think things should be determined, how you determine truth. Everybody obviously has that first layer already set. You make a decision. You say, I'm going to determine truth by this, or I'm going to determine truth by this. Um, for Christians, it is, I'm going to determine that God exists by faith, and faith's their system. And that system stands alone apart from anything else. It is just faith. I just have faith. The atheist says, that's interesting because I have confidence in science. I have confidence in epistemological curiosity. I have a confidence that epistemology is the better approach, or at least an approach that has been proven and tested, so that when I say I have confidence that gravity exists, there's a reason for that. I can say, look, I can demonstrate this. We can go outside and I can drop this ball every single time and it's just going to drop. It's going to drop. It's going to drop. And I can demonstrate. So I can have evidence that both you and I can go out, and because I have confidence in this system, I can demonstrate this system, and that's why I have confidence in it. So there's no doubt that I have this first layer called faith, which you have as well, but I'm going to call it confidence because I think it's a better word than faith, because it gets confused with what we're really talking about when we say faith, because it's not the same thing. That second layer is entirely different than this second layer. They're totally different things. So I have confidence because I can empirically demonstrate to you that gravity exists. And you'll also agree with me because you'll also say that this is a correct way to determine gravity. But if I'm not mistaken, if I understand you correctly, and most Christians, you'll jump over to this side. And when it comes to God, well, we can't use this method. We're going to use this method called faith. And we have confidence in faith that God exists. And I'm sitting here and I'm saying, okay, that's great. That I used to have that, but now I'm wondering why I used to have that, because how do you demonstrate to me that your confidence in faith is a sufficient method to prove that God exists? Nobody seems to be able to verify God exists using the method of faith other than my personal experience. Yeah, which is, that doesn't help me. Like, that's good for you, but if you're going to prove to me that God exists, I need something more than that. I need this type of evidence. And I'm not saying there isn't a third type of evidence or a fourth type of evidence. I mean, there could be something we've never thought of. I'm open to anything that would give me confidence that I can see with my own eye, can be demonstrated to somehow, whatever that might be, even if it is experience, but in some experience that my experience can be replicated, right? Or your experience can be replicated in me. Like if I can have that, then I'll be like, okay, great. I now have confidence in that method as well. And that method therefore proves blah. I've yet to see how the method of faith proves anything. It just doesn't work. So that is my problem. So I don't think we're talking about the same layer of faith when we're discussing this. If we're talking confidence, yes, atheists have a belief, a confidence in a certain method. I have no problem with that. But I do not believe atheists have the same method of faith that you're referring to in that second layer. Does that make sense?
No, I think it does. But let me introduce a different term, and I think it's more of a psychological term than it is either a scientific or a theological term. And that's the term intuition. And and I'm looking at it from this perspective of how we actually live as human beings and how we live fairly and have lived fairly successfully for hundreds of thousands of years. And that's that we don't always have the ability to measure and weigh everything in our environment. We get enough information that it seems plausible. And I actually got this argument from Alan Watts. And if anybody knows a bit about Alan Watts, he was uh, a Buddhist teacher actually. And Watts said, he said, there's never enough information to ever say something's true. He said, we only gather enough that at some point we have confidence to, you said it, confidence to make the leap, okay, that this is true. But we never just, because you could forever get information about a grain of sand. But at some point we have to act on intuition. I feel at this point is true. The evidence makes me feel a bit more confident. And maybe in some things, the evidence makes me feel greatly confident. But in some ways, I intuitively accept things as true. For instance, Dave, we talked about gravity, and I'm not going to be the idiot that argues that gravity doesn't exist. And there's some people out there who probably do. I know there are people actually that do that. That's really stupid. But what is gravity? I mean, what is it? We believe in it and we know its effects, right? But we've intuitively accepted it as a real thing. Okay. And so, yes, there is levels of confidence. And so I introduced the term intuition because I want to sort of divorce it from that faith you described earlier, where it's that kind of faith, Alan, is where people say, you're just supposed to believe this. It doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. It doesn't matter if penguins have freaking flippers. Evolution probably isn't taking right. That's the kind of I agree with you. That's a dumb kind of faith. But there is a gray area where it's hard to tell the difference between these kinds of intuitions and expanding it to say, I think the universe seems to act this sort of way. And I can't really prove it in every instance, but I do see things that make me feel confident enough to accept that as the truth.
Um, okay. So yes, when it comes to things that are verifiable. So again, with gravity, I agree with you. We don't know that the 100 millionth and 16th time that we drop the ball, it's just going to float, right? David
Right.
Hume. Like we don't know. Like, but we base our lives on the uniformity of nature because that's what we know. We also don't know that we're not brains in a vat. There's no way we can know these things. So my problem with the Christian God and the view of that is there is zero types of tests that give us anything to prove that God exists. And also, I have a problem with the Christian that bases their entire life on this God, claiming, I know that I know that I know that I know. Like they have this intense confidence without doubt. I'm going to live my life and die my life for God and for Jesus because I know without a shadow of doubt he exists. And I'm like, based on what? I don't even do that with gravity. I don't even do that with energy. I don't even do that with the universe, even though these are verifiable facts that we have in reality and they comport with reality. But I don't even do that. Like, if you were to ask me, Alan, tell me what you believe dogmatically, 100%, I'd say, well, right now, based on the information I have, this is what I think. But will I die for it? No, because I can't, I don't know with 100% certainty. I'm open to possibilities we have not considered. The Christian says, this is fact, it's God. And I'm like, the only reason I ever believe in God is because I was told to. Like it's what it came down to. Like I was brainwashed to believe he existed, and I have no verifiable evidence for it whatsoever. This method of faith, as you said, even agreeing with me a few minutes ago, it doesn't work. So on what grounds are we going to live our lives based on the rules of some God that we have no evidence for exists? And when I say evidence, I don't just mean the apologetic evidence. So, well, intelligent design shows us there must be a designer. Okay, well, first of all, there's plenty of problems with the intelligent design argument, but as I've been going roundabout with Don Preston, I'm even willing to grant the intelligent design argument for the sake of argument. Let's just say there's an intelligent designer. Great, I'll give that to you. And then I'll even give to you that if you can prove to me that this intelligent designer has to be a god, I'll even grant to you that that God must be Yahweh because he's the best of all possible options. But the problem you have is you can't get me past that 50-yard line. You got to get me to the end zone, man. But if you're going to start with intelligent design and then say, what's God? Well, how do I know? Well, you just have to have faith. Well, you've done nothing. You've just literally just claimed faith again. And I've yet to see a single apologetic argument that takes us to the 100-yard line. It just doesn't do it. Whereas the empirical method, it does. Does that mean that 100-yard line might move in 10 years? Sure, as we discover more information, but at least right now, we can demonstrate things and viably agree on it. We can't do that with God, other than, well, I just believe because. And that frustrates me, man.
Yeah, and it does to me. And those are bad Christian arguments. Particularly that, you just have to believe it, and I would say the problem I have with intelligent design, and I can see some of the things that people that argue from that perspective say. The reality is, the universe is very delicately balanced. And it doesn't take very many. In other words, it's like shooting marbles. You break a. Is that really old? Nobody but me and you probably ever played marbles, by the way. Sorry about that reference, but so but you know what I'm saying. The cause and effect. The marbles go all over the place, right? Well, according to what science says, the marbles have to go almost in a very specific pattern to get what we got now. Now, there's the opposite argument that is like the reason we got what we got now is because the marbles made that pattern. He said, but I get that argument that it seems like the chances for me and you to be here tonight having this conversation, considering all the things that could have happened, is really phenomenal that it really happens. But the problem I have with that is it feels like that if God existed, and this is a question I wrestle with, and I'll take a step back from this. I don't think anybody, if they're being honest with themselves, ever is 100% convinced that they know the exact nature of the universe from a rational standpoint. There are days I feel really strong, and then there's days I look around and think, but why this or why that? I think if we don't say that out loud, then we're not being honest. I have those questions. I wrestle with those things. And I'm leading into this one right here, is if God exists, why does he need a bunch of guys on Facebook to measure the weight of gravity to prove he exists, right? It seems like a decent argument, except it seems kind of weak for an argument for God. So, and maybe that sounds like I'm giving concession to your point there, and maybe I am. I think the intelligent design argument is one sort of thing that might be consistent with the idea of a God, but I don't think it's the slam dunk that people want it to be.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. It's definitely not the slam dunk people want it to be. It does not do the job. In fact, Don and I were debating intelligent design, and because he couldn't get us to God, he switched to presuppositionalism. I was like, okay, well, if you want to talk presuppositionalism, that's a totally different argument, and that's fine. We can discuss that, and I'm open to that. But you can't say that you now proved it by intelligent design. It's not the same thing, right? And the argument typically is, well, you don't have a better argument, Alan. You don't have a better thing. Science hasn't proven it, so therefore Yahweh. And I'm like, what? Therefore Yahweh? What? You mean to tell me there aren't like 15 million possibilities between science's approach and Yahweh? Like, how does science not proving it mean Yahweh? It doesn't.
It doesn't. You're right. No, it doesn't.
Could be the spaghetti monster, right? Like we don't know. We
Right.
don't know. And it's silly for us to base our lives 100% on, and this is what I'm going to ask you then. Like, on what grounds and why, William, do you spend your entire life living based on a rule book called the Bible from a God that you can't even say 100% exists? That seems crazy to me.
Well, you asked that question, and I hope I don't lose respect from, because I want this to be, I want to approach this from a rational standpoint. I think there's value to that. But I think for me, it is an intuitive conclusion. I think today, Alan, if you had cold, hard facts to prove that the Christian faith and all other faiths that exist were wrong, my intuition is that there's something that exists that has a will and purpose that gives form and meaning to things. And I feel like, and this, I don't want to be hokey, and I don't want to turn people off, but this is a personal statement. For me, I do feel like I engage with and interact with that reality. And I think for me, it's not that I believe in Christianity and I believe in intelligent design and I like this argument and this philosophy, and therefore I have to be a Christian. It's more that I kind of have this intuition about how the universe is, and I need a way to engage that. I need a way to live that. I think Jordan Peterson has said, been asked, whether you like him or don't, I don't know. Some people do, some people hate him, whatever. But was asked, if he believed in God, and he made the statement, I really like it. Some people don't. He said, I live as though I believe in God. And I think that's more important than saying I believe in God and you live like you don't. But the point being is what he's saying there is he's interacting with the universe based on these principles because of this intuitive thing that he has in himself. And I don't know if I answered that correctly, but for me, that's it. It's to me, and I've exhausted the rational arguments, and they're never satisfying to me. Even the best ones I've ever put together never make me think, oh, that's a great argument. Now I believe in God. It doesn't work. Matter of fact, it seems to almost sometimes have the opposite effect. But for me, it's just accepting my intuition about the universe. This is how I see it. This is how I engage with it. This seems to be a reality for me. And the ideas, the rationalization is me trying to engage with what I see around me. And I will be honest with you, the Christianity and the Christian faith and how I practice it is sort of like an outer orbit of that. And I don't put that, to discredit or disparage that. But what I mean is, you don't just go from this intuition to, and now I'm going to light candles and burn incense. It just, there's a progression of thought and experience that goes to that for me. And that was probably vague and weird and all over the place, but you did open that Pandora's box. So I hope I tried to answer it. I tried.
No, no, and I appreciate the attempt. I think if Christians were being honest, they would have to answer it the same way. And it's I don't like any of the other explanations, so I'm going to just go with this one. And that sounds to me what you're saying. And that's fine if that's the way you want to live your life, but that doesn't sound like a real answer. It just sounds like I I need to know. I need to fill this gap. And I know you don't like it because you say this in your book. That may not be where God of the gaps originated, but it doesn't matter because this is still a gap filler. That's what this is. I mean, essentially it's I need something to fill this gap. Nothing else satisfies. So Yahweh. Okay. But then you're living your whole life for something you still don't really know. And to me, that sounds a lot like Pascal's wager. I'm going to choose this one because if I don't, and the alternative and this is true, then I'm screwed for life. So I'm going to make this life the best I can because I don't want to face that. But the reality is, Pascal's wager shoots itself in the foot because how do you know that living a life not for God is the better option? And if you choose not God, you'll live a better life versus if you choose God, because you have no way of knowing. Maybe the universe will destroy you for eternity in hell flames if you believe in God. That's Pascal's wager in reverse. Like there's no way to
Right.
do that. So it's just it really in my mind seems very silly to just say I'm going to believe this for what reason? You don't know. You don't have a reason. And I think, and this is where I'm going to throw it out again. I think it's brainwashing. I think you've been so inundated with this your whole life, you're stuck in it, and you can't consider any other option yet.
Well, I mean, there's a part of what you're saying that is true. Part of my experience and part of what causes me to interact with things on some levels the way I do is because of my culture, my language, my upbringing. Those things are are true. Um, but it's like to me, it's like I read an article one time, and a guy was his essential point was how could we say that Indian food is better than I don't know Italian food? How would you say that? They're different things. They have different flavors. They have different tastes. Or what language is better? This language is better than that language. And his concept was that religion, like culture, like language, like food, is a way to express a human reality. And and for those who are maybe listening and you're hoping that I want to really punch hard for the Christian faith, I can do that But I think for me, I have to start by admitting that because it sets the context up for what Christianity means to me. Is I think religions are a language when they're good. Now, I get it that some people don't see that at all, and they think this is I'm just God told me everything because I read the Bible, but I don't agree exactly with that as a way to enter into this thought process. I think you've got to see religions as a part of culture, as a part of interacting as human beings, and that there are various sorts of these languages and cultures, and they may or may not be better ways of expressing how we live and engage as human beings. And I think if I wasn't even an Orthodox Christian, if I was just trying to live in the world, I think I would still have to acknowledge that there's some merit to the the rhythm, the routine, the engagement that religions, and I'm particularly mean the long-standing world religions, they do offer sort of a depth to human experience, and they do tend to try to quantify that, right? So a lot of times we think about religion as this is trying to explain God. I don't think that's really the case. I think it's more about trying to explain humanity. And for most people, that explanation has come to a point where there has to be something above us that gives definition to what is good and what is evil and what's right and what's wrong, what's beautiful, what's true. And that thing needs to be there in order for us to define what we should be and how we should live in the world. So to me, religion is not about proving God exists. It's about reacting to the universe the best I know how to, based on the best tools I have available to me.
So interesting. Okay, so when we had our first conversation on the phone before the show, one of the things that we had dialogue about was this very issue, discussing religion, um, almost as though it could be a sphere of thought. So you have philosophy, you have theology, you have science, and you have religion, right? So it could be its own standing thing, and it would focus on the sphere of morality and how humans live in this world morally. I think that was what we discussed. And I said, yeah, okay, I'd be all right with that as long as we kept God out of it, because I see no need for there to be a God or even, as you said, some higher being to explain humanity. I don't think that's necessary. I think the best person you can go to try to understand humanity is a human, because they're the only ones that are human. The assumption that God became human, again, that goes back to faith. Like it's this whole faith thing. Like, and I'm just like, why are we even toying with that idea? It's been 2,000 plus years, and still we've yet to have a single argument that takes to the 100-yard line. It's just all speculation and all guesses and all just faith. So I would be all right if we were able to isolate religion from the theistic realm and just have it be a sphere of where we discuss morality and separate it out from philosophy. That's fine. I'd be all right with that, because, like, when you look at the definitions of religion, I'm in dictionary.com. Um, the main definition is a set of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe, especially when considered as the creation of a superhuman agency or agencies, usually involving devotion and ritual observances, and often containing a moral code governing the conduct of human affairs. Like, there's so many problems with that right out the gate from me. Even the term creation, I'm just like, oh, okay, that's right out the gate an assumption. It's a presupposition, because why? God. Well, okay, but still, are there plausitive explanations that could have brought this universe about without God? Yes, there are. There are plausible possibilities. Can we prove them all yet? No, but they're plausible. Am I jumping on them and saying 100%? I know that I know that I know that I know. I'm not doing that. I'm saying they're plausible, but they're more plausible than God, because at least they're based on scientific facts that we already have. And we're saying, hey, if this fact is true and that fact is true, which they are, then this is very, very likely. Whereas God, it still comes down to, well, we don't like that, so God. That's not evidence at all. So I have a real problem with that type of definition, that it has to do with servitude and creation and worshiping some God. But if you jump down to the third, definition of religion, the body of persons adhering to a particular set of beliefs and practices. All right, I can live with that. I mean, if we're going to go with
And
that,
it's hard to distinguish that definition from just a general definition of society, right? I mean, a society is the same thing on that level.
well,
And
right.
and if
Yeah.
you follow, the emergence of Western civilization, or I don't think it's fair to call it Western Civ, by the way, but most of our civilizations that exist today, they come to being on the banks of these rivers. But one of the key concepts to all these societies is the idea of the rule of heaven, the rule of that authority comes down. And these societies were able to sort of build the structure, and then you had this person sort of at the top. And the question is, why does this guy get to say? Well, he's been given this position by the rule of heaven. Now, this is not to say the Hebrew version of God, because we're talking about the Chinese had this, the Indus Valley in Mesopotamia, we have that. We had that even in South America on the Amazon River, this concept that authority, the reason the guy up top gets to say is because he has that place because God put, or something put him, the heavens put him there. Now, in Chinese philosophy, the idea was if that guy got overthrew, he was also being judged by the power of heaven. So, and I think you asked a question the last time we talked, and it was one that made me think, and it was a good question. So you essentially asked me, you said, if what you're saying is true about society and this interaction and these languages and the ways of structuring things is true, why do we need God? And I thought it was a good question. Why does God have to be in there for it to work? And my answer is not going to be an answer. It's going to be kind of a backsided flip. It's probably the same reason why you're offended by God being in the system, because we want the system to be rational, right? We don't want to just be reacting to the world in a way that has no rational sense to it. And I think maybe this is something me and you can both agree on, even though we don't agree on the detail, that we both feel like that if at the least we should live rational lives. Our lives should have some rational, and I would say this, and I'll let you respond to this. Probably some of the problems that people do have with religion is when religion becomes irrational, when we do things uh, that harm others for no reason, or when we abuse and destroy things for no reason. I think we can both agree that reason and truth and righteousness, they're very similar concepts, aren't they? What do you think about that?
So my first thought and reaction to what you said is, um, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying there needs to be, and you've said this quite a bit today, there needs to be, and you're saying there needs to be a rational reason. There has to be some reason why we do what. And my question is why? Why does there have to be? Why do we have to assume that there is a reason for suffering? Why does there have to be a rational reason for morality? Why do we have to ration anything? We don't ration anything or determine morality or even determine a reason for suffering simply because some eternal being cared to give us rationality. We did it because we evolved as humans and we decided that we wanted things to be rational. We decided that we want to give a reason to morality. But there's nothing at all that gives us any evidence that says there has to be a reason. There's nothing that tells us some eternal being had some reason for the suffering that we're there doesn't have to be a reason. Maybe there's a reason, but maybe there's not. And we don't know that there is. And so I think the only reason humans have value is because humans said we have value. And we are living the way we're living because we want there to be sustenance for us. We want to survive. We want to succeed. This is evolution at its best. It's natural selection. I mean, this is just what we're facing. These are all the things that make sense of our environment. You don't need a God for this unless you're going to force that there has to be some intelligent reason for all of this. And I'm saying, why? Why does there have to be? Maybe things just are what they are. And here we are, and we're saying, we can do better. And we can come up with reasons. And we can live in a society that has good morals together where we don't hurt each other. And we do things that are best for each other because that's what's best for me. That just makes sense. The only reason that people pick God as their objective standard is because they like the rules he claims and says, and they're choosing him. God doesn't come down and force anybody to believe in him, supposedly, and clearly, because everybody is determining their own objective standard. Like, what Christian isn't saying, I'm choosing Yahweh to be my objective standard? That that's not objective, that's subjective. You've literally just said you're determining what you want your objective standard to be, and you're saying it's Yahweh. That takes the power away from Yahweh, that puts it in your hands. You've decided that. So you're doing nothing different than I'm doing as an atheist. And I'm just saying, well, I'm choosing it not to be Yahweh because I see no reason for that. I look around and what I see is people, and I see things I can evidence, see things I can verify, and I'm going to choose to live based on this set of rules because this just makes more sense to me, and it makes more sense in the vast life that we live that we can actually see and experience and
But that, but
validate.
that's reason, and don't miss what I'm saying because you think I'm trying to force you into Yahweh. But reason, and you said, why do you need a reason? Well, because we're reasonable beings. There's by nature we don't want to be unreasonable. We want to have
Correct.
rationale,
Yeah,
right?
no, I agree, but that's because we've evolved to have reason. And so we have chosen to use that reason to make better decisions.
So what I would say then is, and so it's kind of like what's come first to me, and this is from a philosophical type of, and I think it's really a good observation of humanity. I don't think it's just philosophy for the sake of being philosophical. I think we don't like unreasonableness. I think the closest, I think what I was saying earlier, that feeling of, so why is it wrong to murder someone? I mean, I'm not, and I'm not trying to play trick questions here. I'm serious. What there's something about it that's unreasonable. It's not rational. We're taking something super important from somebody, from something that can never, the most thing that they could ever steal, or and if we do have to do things that are aggressive, we want to make sure that they are for good reason, right? And I think when we start thinking about it that way, and I will switch here and throw a plug for the Christian faith, is this idea of the logos, and we borrowed that maybe or from the Greeks who talked about this idea of reason, this reason that governs human affairs. Is it granting wishes to people? Is it giving my grandmother gas money? Maybe not. And I'm not trying to jump to that, but I'm saying it's sort of this thing that we need. We need. You said why do we need? Because I feel like human beings need that. And the reason that you take the view that you take and I take the view that I take is we have worked things out and we've looked around us, and what we have, the answers we have been given at times were not good enough. And then we found other answers that seem to be better and they fit what we see. And so I think this is true because the continuous human experiment for the last what 11,000 years since the Neolithic revolution has been that societies have. We're talking about evolution, right? So let's use evolution as the base. Societies have evolved to believe that there's a higher power that sort of gives structure to all of our other structures. It gives reason to it. So you asked that question, and I didn't really have a great answer for it before, but that's going to be my answer today. I think the reason that we need something at the top of the pyramid is because otherwise it unravels the rationality of everything else we do. And maybe we could just behave well without that, but it seems to be psychologically a part of who we are that we want to have a rationale for how we behave.
I mean, so let's say there has to be, for the sake of argument, I'll grant that there has to be a higher power. Okay, why does it have to higher power have to be some infinite Yahweh creator God? In fact, I mean, it seems like every culture seems to have their own rules. Nobody seems to follow Yahweh consistently anyway. So I'd like to know why this has to be God. Like,
Doesn't have to be.
no,
No, it doesn't. You're right.
just be some human king, some human ruler, a president of the United States, for example. I mean, it seems to be working. So I'm just saying, like, take out the middleman, Yahweh, and you pretty much described what we are living like today.
But what happens when the president becomes corrupt.
then you have a problem, and then you have to just disregard him. How do you know? And here's the thing: if you don't have the level of intelligence as Yahweh does, then how can you possibly know that he won't become corrupt?
He probably will at some point. Somebody will. Somebody at somebody in that position will, and that's happened over and over. We've seen that. Um,
Wow, that's a fact. I've never heard anybody agree that Yahweh could become correct. That's wild.
well, obviously, Yahweh, you know, the concept of Yahweh and actual Yahweh are not the same thing. And even if you pay real close attention to people um, that are really consistent with actual theology, like the Hebrews and even the early church fathers, they will tell you that our concept of God and what God is not the thing. Whatever God is, God that is not something we can define with mental aspirations and language. So that leaves us, we do have a concept of God, and that concept needs to be constantly compared to reality, right? I think you could probably at least agree to some degree to that. That if we were constantly so basically what that's meaning is we should always be comparing our concepts of reality to actual reality.
Sure.
And
Well,
that's just yeah.
I don't think Yahweh comports with reality to begin with. So that's a conundrum question for me. But
It would depend on how you defined that, okay?
sure.
And so if you go from your grandma's Sunday school vision of God, uh, that's very naive. It's sort of childlike. It's anthropomorphic. Uh, and it's Granny's best way of telling you how the universe works. Okay, and it worked for Granny. And not trying to insult Granny, but that's if we're thinking bigger here, we need to think with bigger concepts. So Yahweh doesn't need to look like um, the many, many, many ways he's described in many, many places of faith. Okay. We could say this higher power doesn't even have to be anything but an energy or a force that somehow wills things to be or grants being. Does it love us? Who knows? It doesn't have to. Not from where I'm thinking now. Now I have
All
other
right.
I have other thought processes. I feel like they get me to that point, but this one doesn't get me there. It just gets me to the point of that there's something in this hierarchy of knowledge and structure and relationship. It's one of those infinite regresses, and at some point you have to have a thing that gives structure to all the things. Now that thing could be anything. All right, it doesn't. And I don't want to. I don't want to leap right from there to okay. Now let's sing Amazing Grace. That's not thinking. Okay, and maybe we never get to that point. Fair enough. But I think, and so this is me just trying to work the problem out. And I think this is going to be a problem for atheists, Alan. I think as an atheist, it's going to be difficult for you to admit to what I'm saying as being a reality without conceding something that exists. Now follow me here, above the natural order of things. If it's and this is going back to Aristotle and Plato, if there's something that exists above the natural order of things, then that thing is supernatural by definition. That doesn't mean it grants wishes and shoots sparks. It just means by definition it is above the natural order.
Yeah, I mean, and I understand that if I were to concede that that was necessary, then yes, but I don't concede that. I do not think that you need to have something above. I think you can have something below. I think the whole concept of evolution demonstrates that we get from worse to better. So that concept contradicts the idea of a higher being that created something lesser. So I think every day I evolve and I become a better version of me than I was the day before. That didn't require a higher power. It's just me developing myself and getting from worse to better. So no, I don't, and that's just social
Well,
evolution.
let me ask you this question: what defines better?
I mean, and that's a valid question. It is. It's a question that's very philosophical, and so we'd have to discuss that. But I suppose if I can't answer that, I don't know that you can either. And I suppose the only what you're going to say is, well, God defines it for me. I'm going to say only because you choose that God defines it for you because you like His definition, and I might like another definition. So we're still stuck in the same place. And I appreciate everything you said up until saying it had to be a higher power. I was in agreement with, and I was like, holy crap, all the Christians watching are going to hate you because it sounded like you could just as well call Yahweh energy. And I'm like, okay, well, if you're stuck on the term Yahweh, fine, call him Yahweh, but it's energy. Like, I'm fine with that. But I still would not live my life on the I know that I know that I know that I know principle and base my entire life on some God and his rules and telling me how I need to live and how I need to think, and that when I sin, I offend the holy God, and then I have to grovel and have, dude, forget all that. Like, I could not possibly, I can't live like that anymore based on a hunch that maybe there's a higher power. And if it's a higher power, could it be Yahweh? Yeah, maybe. Well, if it's well, I don't know. We have a Bible, so let's go with it. Like, that's just really, I mean, that's so flimsy, man. That's terrible. So no, I couldn't live like that ever again. And I don't know how you do, man. I don't know how any Christian does if that's the way they're living. Like, and I don't think Christians actually have security. I don't think they have definitiveness. I think they genuinely, if they're being honest, think the way you do, and they don't know what to do with it, but they just can't get out of the matrix. Um, and and that's what I hope to do is free
But I
minds.
wouldn't know what would be on what would be outside of the matrix. Okay, so if there's no rationality, or if rationality is just an arbitrary thing that's happened, there's no truth, then who cares? Who cares if people are deluded?
I don't know that that's the answer. The point I'm making is maybe we care, maybe we don't. Maybe there's a truth, maybe there isn't. Maybe we know, maybe we don't. Maybe there's a reason, maybe there isn't. But it's better to say, I don't know yet, than to just live your life on something you don't know and just pretend like you know. That's a lie. So I'd rather be where I am because even though I'm an atheist, I'm also an agnostic because I'm willing to admit I don't know. Maybe Yahweh does pop up one day out of the blue and be like, haha, ta da, I tricked y'all, here I am. I'll be the first to say, okay, praise Yahweh, you exist, but I'll still be doing the same channel and I'll still be saying I can't stand him. He's, you know, advocated for rape, murder, and suicide, or I mean, and slavery. I'm done with you. You know what I mean? Like, so I'll still do the same thing. I'll just change my tone and say, yeah, he exists. But to live your life based on it, like that's, like, I did that for 40 years and I robbed myself of so many enjoyments in life because of that. And that's why I want to unravel people from believing something simply to believe it. If it becomes true, great. But dude, it's been 2,000 years and counting and more if you include the other gods, and yet nothing except, well, how do you explain all this? It has to be something. So Yahweh, like that's really what you're saying. And I like no, I'd rather live in the unknown because it's a much better place than saying I know something I don't. Because that's
Well,
just
I don't think we're very comfortable living in the unknown very long.
no, we're not comfortable with it, but that
Right.
doesn't give us an excuse to make something up.
No, and I agree with that. That we will agree on, and I think cheap, made up excuses and made up answers. Um, I agree with you. Those they're not satisfying. They don't give us any real substance, and I think they can be dangerous, Alan. I think when people just leap to conclusions to feel better, they can also leap to the conclusion that I can kill and murder all this whole village over here because God wants me to. So I think maybe me and you could agree that that's
Yeah,
dangerous for people to just leap to conclusions.
dude, I've heard Christians, and Jen Fishburne was just telling me some testimonies of people she actually talked to that said, I have to be a Christian because if I wasn't, if I was an atheist, I'd go out and I'd kill people and rape people and
I'm
dude,
sorry.
and
Don't listen. Don't ever trust those people because they will rape and murder you right now.
that's the point I'm making. So apparently being a Christian isn't changing that. It's just there's something restraining them because they're free. They're afraid to go to hell. And that's not a good reason to not rape and murder people. I'm sorry.
No, not right, right,
That's not loving, that's not caring, that's fear. Like it's fear for
right.
something else. So you're a horrible person if that's the way you think.
Yeah,
So I don't think you need an answer to these questions in order to not want to rape and murder people. I don't know the answer to these questions, and I'm not out eating babies and raping and murdering. I'm sitting here talking to you for crying out loud. And I mean, I can hardly wait till I'm off so I can go like cuddle with my girl. You know what I mean? Like this
yeah,
is not. I'm not living some crazy, ridiculous life just because I'm an
sure.
atheist.
And I will say this too. I mean, for the Buddhist religion, accepting the unknown is an integral part of that faith. So when we're talking about religion, I think it's fair to look at other perspectives of it. So and when you say, does that immediately lead us to this faith in Yahweh? No, it doesn't, because I think Buddhism sort of accepts this over Taoism is both in both of these religions, by the way, are religions and philosophies that I gain a lot of knowledge from and have a lot of respect for, but both of them don't really in Buddhism, there's not really an acknowledgement. There's an old Buddhist poem about they asked the Buddha, did God exist? And he says yes. And they asked the Buddha, does God not exist? And he says yes, because the Buddha's always saying things that contradict this. But the bottom line is that's the Buddhist way of saying I don't know, and it's not important. Okay. So what you're saying there is a valid, it is, I don't think it's an irrational response to what I'm saying. It's one of the rational responses. And I think for me, and you kind of started out like this journey I was on, for me, I came to this place. I came to this place of, I think there's something valid here. I think I don't want to ignore or jettison the human experience of reason, rationality, consciousness, relating to the world. But that doesn't lead me to the doorstep of the Christian faith or any faith. I need that. So that, to me, that was the second stage of the journey, to ask, okay, if this is true, if what I'm saying is true, and at the minimum, if somebody would agree with, say, well, I agree with what you're saying, there may be a first principle, throwing back to the Greek philosophers, a first principle, a prime mover. That doesn't mean that's Yahweh. Right. Okay. You're fair enough. So maybe the Buddhists are right, and maybe everybody else is wrong. Maybe the Taoists are right. Maybe, I don't know, but I think you don't leap forward. You do investigation, and you ask questions, and you try to understand what they're saying. And that's kind of where I went to next from that point. I think going back to the first chapter of the book, when I say atheism is not a religion, this point is where, and this has been a very good and very rational conversation, by the way. This point is where we get to in this discussion, and it's you're saying I think we can do without that defined first principle, and I'm saying I don't think we can. But both of us are making assertions about the nature of reality, and I think that's what I'm trying to say is we need to at least be honest with the fact that the real debate is not about whether there's streets of gold and all that stuff. The real debate is, do we need a first principle? Do we need an origin of this thing, or is it okay for us just to live without it? And I think rational atheists say it's okay, we don't need it. And I say I think we do. And I think that's the real sort of debate there, for me anyway.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's interesting because I mean, this whole series that we're going to be doing is going to be trying to get to the bottom line of why you think you have to have that ultimate being and why I don't. That's very fascinating. Um, I'm popping into the YouTube channel now because we've been
Yeah.
on for an hour and 10 minutes. And as fun as this is, we're going to have weeks to talk, and I want to give people a chance to answer questions. Or ask her questions. So if you haven't asked a question yet and you want to, this is your chance. Pop in there, and I'm jumping in here to see if there is any questions. While I am looking for questions, William, if you want to talk a little bit about the books, you go ahead and do that for a second, and I'll go look for some questions.
Yeah. And so the book that I wrote was called The 10 Myths of Atheism. You can find it on Amazon. And it is, again, a book addressing these sorts of points, and hopefully having fostering these sorts of discussions about and really, I guess that's really what the book is about, is what's the real discussion? What are we really talking about? And what sort of arguments and what should we really be discussing? And I'd like to make a plug for Alan's book, How to Kill God the Easy Way. I would think, and I would say this, and I think I've told Alan this, the sorts of arguments that Alan brings against theism and the Christian faith are similar to what I'm doing about atheism. Even if you don't agree with Alan's conclusion. Oh, the criticisms he brings are valid, and they should be listened to. And a Christian apologist shouldn't be giving cheap answers, and they shouldn't ignore real questions that people have, and they shouldn't, just gloss over these things. So I think if you would listen to a person who's been a pastor, been a Christian apologist, written in defense of the Christian faith, who is now an atheist and has real concerns about why his beliefs there and these things challenged him and led him to draw these conclusions. I think at the very minimum, it's a value to listen to that and listen to that honestly. And I think Alan is writing that book honestly. He's making real criticisms that we should be listening to. So hopefully these two books together, we're kind of coming um, at these things from opposite direction. But as you listen to us here today, one of the things I think we're both trying to do is be as honest as we can with the subject, and we both don't like those cheap arguments and those cheap shot sort of debate tactics back and forth. And these two books are targeting those sorts of things, if nothing else.
Yeah. And I'll say to your book, the one thing I did appreciate is that um, even though you obviously still believe in a higher power and if I'm not mistaken, would still advocate that it's Yahweh, um, you didn't really fight hard to make that case as much as you did to make the case that um, we shouldn't just run from religion just because we can't prove Yahweh exists. And it was an interesting point, and I appreciated that, which is why I'm saying if we can leave a God out of it and we were able to create it as just a sphere of discussion of morality, I'm fine with that. But I don't know that we'll be able to just because it's got so much history. And, as soon as you say religion, you assume a God. Um, and it's tough. But, we got weeks to solve the world's problems. So maybe we can figure it out together. I will say, I'm looking through the questions here. I only see questions from Eastgate Adoptionist. I don't know if you know who that is.
I don't know.
I'm assuming they're all for me because they seem to be all against the atheist view. But DNA and RNA is a ordered code. Where did that code come from for the first living cell that can regulate and duplicate? Um, I mean, I don't know. You're going to hear me say that a lot. I don't know. And if I don't know, that doesn't mean Yahweh.
Well, and also just to help you out here, I'll help you fight this battle.
Do it. Thank you.
The other thing is if you follow modern genetics, they're saying like Dennis Noble is saying that DNA is not the blueprint of life that we at once thought that it was. And so before we jump into saying, well, God wrote, the blueprints for humanity in DNA, I think we should, as theists and particularly as Christians, we should really think about the argument we're making and what we're saying there. Again, that's one of those arguments that sounds like a really cheap way to defend an infinite entity, right? God has to exist because he made a molecule. Well, good for God, I get it, but that's not the sort of right.
Right.
I don't think
Well,
that's not the arguments that's going to if we wanted to, and I really don't want to convince people, and I don't want to so understand. But if I were trying to convince somebody that God existed, I don't think those are the arguments that work. But anyway,
no,
my thoughts.
I agree, and I appreciate that. Next question from Eastgate Adoptionist again. Why did the Planck telescope in 2013, using the cosmic microwave background, find that our solar system is the center of the universe and the axis of evil? Again, I don't know. But
Axis of evil.
what I don't know. But what I will say is, whatever that question means, we don't even know that this is our only universe. So, or
Right.
whatever universe, who knows? So I don't have a good answer for you. Does the famous double slit experiment in QM show that the building blocks of our reality are not physical on top observation? No, I don't think that that's the case. I watched the video. I don't believe that. But even if it was, again, doesn't prove Yahweh. That is all I'm arguing. You can make all the cases in the world and prove all the things that I can't explain. You can show all the fallacies with science and point all the holes in it whatsoever, but you still have the burden of proof to show that Yahweh is the alternative and only possible option. You cannot say the flying spaghetti monster isn't a candidate. It is. And so are flying pixie fairies. And so are unicorns. I mean, these are all possible options. Like, just because I don't have an answer and science can't prove it, and you have holes, great, you have holes. That doesn't prove anything on the alternative. You know, I mean, proving something else wrong doesn't make the alternative right. You still have the work to do. So I don't know the point of these questions. Um, this is kind of a question from West King 56. It might be for you if you can remember what you're talking about in this context. If not, we'll just move on. He says, meaning to things like disease, poverty, rape, murder, incest, starvation, abuse. Do you have any
That's a
context?
question, I think, and I think if I'm understanding that right, he's saying if we're looking for meaning and we have this, and I'm suggesting that meaning comes from this ultimate source, then why would that meaning allow maybe things like rape, murder, da da da? Um, so terrible things. Why would terrible? It's kind of like maybe a way of bringing in the argument: why does evil exist? And I don't know if I'm have a great answer about why evil exists. But I would say back to the argument of meaning, and that's where I was at. I think without meaning, we don't know. And I need to pause here and say I don't think being a theist makes us know that rape is wrong or murder is wrong. I think being human beings lets us know that. Okay.
I agree.
Okay. But it's still a meaning, right? It's still defining this is a wrong thing to do, and this is a right thing to do
Yes.
because okay. So I was arguing for meaning, and I still think meaning helps us to define even that bad things are bad.
Yeah, I just don't think they're necessarily intrinsic from some being or from the universe. I think we make them have meaning because
Possibly, and I don't say possibly. We definitely interact with meaning. I will give you that we interact with it. Now, what my burden of proof would be to show that we're not the only thing interacting with it. Okay, but we
sure,
do interact with it, no doubt, no doubt.
absolutely. Now, Scott Schaefer's final comment, well, I guess second to last. Well, really, all you need to do is show that God is the better explanation. God is more plausible. William, does that ultimately prove God exists just because he's the better option than pixie fairies?
No,
No, it doesn't.
no, because
They're
because why? Because there could be a third option that none of us know about.
exactly.
Okay, so yeah, no, yeah.
I totally agree with you. Like, and that's where I'm at. That is why I still remain an atheist instead of a Gnostic atheist. Because not the Gnostic atheists see. So back to the original way we started this conversation on your book, right? In chapter one, the reason I don't believe, and I would disagree that atheists have a belief system. Oh no, let me correct that. Atheism has a belief system. Atheists most certainly have belief systems. There's no question about that. And maybe that is what you were driving at because I have a belief system. I can't tell you that I know that I know that I know that I know it's true. But I obviously have a belief system and I've developed it much since I've left Christianity. But just because I'm an atheist, that has no bearing on what my belief system is. My belief system is based on many things like humanism, science, rationality, like all kinds of things. My stance as an atheist is restricted to one thing and one thing only. I don't see enough evidence for the existence of God, therefore a God, non-God. That's it. It's the negation of the claim that God exists. Because theism is the belief that God exists. Atheism negates that and says the disbelief that God exists. That's all it is. It's a negation. So we are not making claims as a system of atheism. We're not a united front with our beliefs. We don't have, 10 tenets of faith. We don't have a an Apostles' Creed. We don't have anything like. I have no connection with anybody in atheism except for one thing. We see no evidence for the existence of God. Therefore, we don't believe God exists. That's it. Other than that, nothing else. There's no other beliefs whatsoever. Now, as an atheist, an individual atheist, yes, you can knock me all day long for all kinds of beliefs. And I I can't deny that I have beliefs, but it isn't because of atheism. It's because I'm also a humanist. I'm also a rationalist. I'm also a naturalist. I'm also a scientist. You know what I mean? Like all of these things are what drive my beliefs, but it isn't
Mhm.
atheism.
Sure.
So that is why I would disagree by your premise. But if you're just suggesting that atheists in general have belief systems, then obviously I'd have to agree with you because yeah,
I think that was, I think that's the point. I think that's really where I hope that people would see. We all have belief systems, all
we
of
all
us.
have belief systems. Of course we do. Well,
And
how do you exist without a belief system? You're obviously going to create. You got to come up with something.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And so,
Sure.
if we acknowledge that, then at least gets us on a honest place to have this discussion. Now
Yes.
we're talking about, because I don't think atheists and theists typically disagree about the facts that we're examining. Some people do, and there's some really retarded people out there. Pardon me for using that word, but there's some people that really hold some really bad ideas about things. And I get that too on both sides. Okay, both sides of that. But I think the general people like myself and yourself, we don't disagree on the facts. We can see what's happening around us, and we're trying to come to a conclusion about what that means and how best we should live in this reality we have. I think, and we don't disagree about that. Okay, and so we don't always have to totally be at war on every point of everything, right? I think we want to live the best possible lives, give the most value possible to our lives and the lives of others. So it's worth having a discussion, a real discussion about what these things mean and why we believe the things we believe, I think.
Yeah. No, I love it. And dude, I cannot really fathom having a better person on the show to have these discussions with because
But
I,
thank you.
I'm loving this, man. We're listening to each other, we're dialoguing, we're interacting. This is cool.
Yeah.
This is what we need
I
more of.
will tell you, there are probably a lot of people on Facebook and social media, Alan, that wanted to see you just elbow me in the forehead. And they're probably disappointed that I'm a flaming jerk, so you could do that. And I'm sorry to disappoint them, but
Yeah, well, I'm sure you pissed off a lot of Christians tonight, but who knows? Maybe I pissed off
probably, yeah.
some next. Who knows? I mean, we're going
Probably.
to do that. Well, we do have 6 minutes left. If there's nothing else, we'll move on. But I do see a couple more questions in here, and they're from the same guys again. Let's see. Um, uh, Eastgate adoptionist again. If we only discover what's possible in math with a system that is already set, why do we have this math layer for our reality if we are here by chance? I mean, I don't know. What does it? Do you understand that question?
I think what he's saying there is why does math why okay, I'm trying to think of a way to say this is not the universe. Math does work in reality. Okay, let's start with that. Math works.
Yeah.
Okay, and it seems to work to the point we can do super awesome things like send probes out into deep space. Okay, so I guess what he's asking is if the universe responds to something like math, and math gives us an accurate picture of that universe, why does that exist? And I will say I think that is a interesting argument. I haven't really thought it through enough to know whether I like it or not. But it still almost goes back to the argument of meaning, doesn't it? Because math is some way mapping meaning, right? Reality.
And I would just probably respond to that with simply for the same reason the laws of nature exist. I mean, uh, we don't
It could be that just math works because it just works, right? Like kind of like it just does.
exactly like we give terms to these laws and to math and make them work for us, but we didn't create them, and nor did anybody else. They're just inherent in the system that has evolved. Like, and again, is it possible that those laws require a designer? Yeah, it's possible. But is it possible that they don't? Yes, also possible. Is it possible that if it does require a designer, that designer is the flying spaghetti monster? Yes. All I'm saying is all of these questions still don't get us any closer to Yahweh. All they do is pause and make us pause and say, maybe this is not correct. Great. I have no problem with that. I'll be challenged all day with anything because I'm at a stage in my life where my favorite answer is I don't know. And I'm
A
okay.
very good answer, by the way.
I'm just okay with that now because I lived 40 years of my life saying I know that I know that I know that I know, and I'm tired of pretending like I know when I don't know. I don't want to live a lie anymore. That's just stupid. So I'd rather just say I don't know, but that doesn't mean this. It just means maybe not this. That's all that means.
Let's not leap to conclusions. That we 100% agree on every time. Yes, let's not
Yes.
leap.
Absolutely. So to conclude, I will respond to Scott Schaefer's last thing because you had to respond to his previous one. So he said, not proof, the unreasonable effectiveness. Wait, sorry, he went through something. Oh wow, he just keeps going. Okay, we're gonna have to end here sometime. My point is that your measure, according to your own statement, is plausibility, not proof. Okay, that's what I've been saying the whole night. Yes, it's plausible that Yahweh exists, not proof. You've said nothing then other than what we've said the entire night. That is absolutely the point we're making is we're here and we're trying to figure stuff out and we're both kind of like coming to a center where we're saying, maybe we just have to live in the world of discomfort and say, we don't know. In my opinion, better to be an agnostic than to claim that you know something you don't. I don't know, but that's just me. William, why don't you finish out? You have a couple minutes here if you want to say some final thoughts, and then we're going to have to end for the night. But we're going to be back together again next Sunday night at 6:30. So I'm excited to continue the conversation. But any closing thoughts for us, buddy?
Yeah, just again, glad to do this. I think to revisit the original point, and I'm glad what you said was really what I hope the reaction is, and that's not a concession. It's not a slam dunk on you or anything. It's just that's what I want the discussion to get to is we're looking at belief systems at some point. We're not arguing facts. If we're arguing facts, whether you're a Christian, atheist, whatever, if you're denying facts, you've got a whole different set of problems. Okay. But if we see the same facts and we're trying to determine how we conceive of those facts, that's what we're talking about, and that lets me and you, Alan, have a actual conversation when we're saying I don't know this but I believe this, I think this is true. We can argue about what the fact is and then we come to a conclusion, but we can't have a real conversation about things if we're not both seeing that there's things that we conclusions we sort of have came to or haven't come to. Okay. So, like for you, it's like I haven't come to a conclusion. I've come to the conclusion that I don't have a conclusion, sort of, if that's fair enough. But it's still, we're seeing that we're dealing with belief systems that lets us talk. That was what I hope people got out of that first chapter of the book. So, thank you, Alan. This has been it's been a privilege to be here, and look forward to do this in the future. We laughed about that first conversation we had. I wish we could have got that one taped because we just went all over the universe probably within a couple of hours. But
Me too,
so
man.
give us time, and it's gonna get fun. And I would encourage anybody that's listening, get in here, participate. We want to interact with you guys. I'd love to hear, pick me apart, slam on me. I want you to punch at me because that makes me get better. It makes me think harder. So that's it. That's what I got. Yep.
Absolutely. So next week, William, what are we? We're advancing to knives, right? We're bringing knives to the fight next week.
Yes. Next week there'll be knives. Yes.
William,
Or
you have
water balloons. I don't know.
that might be a good next step because we escalate too quick. We're not
No, no.
getting.
We'll save that for the fifth episode.
Everybody, thank you for joining. Tell your friends, like, subscribe, share, drop a donation if you want to support it to make sure we keep doing this. William, thank you for being on, my friend.